Joey, ready when you are.
Great. Well, we'll go ahead and kick off. This is the security and monitoring talk in the data center facilities track. Let me figure out how to work the slide deck. My name is Joey Arado. I'm an information security engineer with Facebook. And when we talk about security and monitoring, what we're really talking about is in the OT or operational technology space. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the OT space, this is really centered around things like industrial control systems, building monitoring systems, and all of those technologies. So if we look at this space, what we really see is we're seeing an increased rate of threat actors that are coming after industrial control systems, whether they be power plants, whether they be data centers, whether they be retail environments. We're increasingly seeing the threats in these spaces accelerate. And the question that we've all been asking is, when we look at these devices, they're typically designed around reliability, not so much how we can better secure them from a cybersecurity standpoint. And so where the genesis of this started with is, how can we really partner together with other consumers of these products, with the vendors that design them, to really bake security a little bit better into them to kind of meet some of our needs. So when we talk about how we might do that, we really looked at what would be the best way to better bake security. And when we looked at the space, we see there are multiple people out there that are kind of working on their own to develop security standards. We see this with some of our partners, with some of other companies, where there's some disparate efforts to better secure this space. And we thought, hey, what if we could consolidate these efforts into one larger effort? We could pull on a wide view, a wide range of perspectives, to really kind of establish some standards and some frameworks about how we could increase security. And so that's where we started to think, could we work through OCP and through all the partners in OCP to consolidate, to line up, to lean on these perspectives and start to really redesign the approach to security in the OT space. So that kind of comes to the objectives that we would want for our project. And they really centered around kind of three things, right? Establishing those standards, looking at device communications and how devices in the OT world communicate. Could we kind of revisit those to see if we could do a little bit different on how we secure them? And then finally, developing OT security frameworks. And I'll get a little bit more in depth on these kind of in the next slide of what we're thinking, but these would be the primary objectives of the project. So if we talk about objectives, that kind of leads us into scope. And we've had some initial meetings, and this list will probably be refined in the future as we as a collective group that have been working on this decide what we want to prioritize. But this was our initial swag of what the scope of the project might look at. And I'm going to start with this piece in the middle, which is monitoring and analytics. And so if we look at monitoring analytics in the OT space today, we have some challenges. And I'll speak specifically to things like PLC rings, right? If we look at a PLC ring, we'll typically have a bridge that kind of attaches to the network. And then we'll have a bunch of devices that live on the bridge behind that. And what happens is, as a security team, we might have visibility to what's going on the bridge, but we won't have visibility to anything that sits behind it. So when it comes to things like vulnerability monitoring, that's not something we can really do for anything that lives behind them. Event monitoring to see what's going on with these specific devices, those are kind of a challenge to see. And so the thought would be, how could we maybe establish some logging and monitoring frameworks to say, hey, can we either, establish a methodology by which the devices that live behind a PLC ring might roll up some security logs to the bridge device and then pass them on? Or could we just look at the communications protocols? And that kind of jumps back to here, is there a desire to look at how these things communicate and redesign them in a little different way? Device authentication is another big area. When we look at these networks, right, they're typically a very open network. We don't really have a network level authentication methodology. If we do, it's typically limited to something like a MAC address filtering, and the ability to do like an 802.1x environment where a device would authenticate itself to a network isn't typically baked into these products. Could we look at those standards and maybe look at how those might be implemented into an OT environment? The last two pieces in the initial scope we proposed around device management, What type of APIs could we use for integration with other systems? And if there was a vulnerability on a known device, how could we know it? One of the challenges we see in this space is traditional vulnerability management that might happen in an IT world is very challenging in an ICS world, right? Because just a device vuln scan could cause a device to fail over, and that could have a real world operational impact for people. And so we can't rely on traditional vulnerability scanning and for vulnerability management for this space. So if we were to take a look at how might we do that in an OT environment, in an environment where reliability and uptime are our primary concerns, how can we also bake in a methodology to really discover devices that have known vulnerabilities and how we might patch them? So again, we're having lots of conversations about what the scope is. I expect this to be refined in the coming weeks and months, but this was kind of our initial swag. So this is our call to action. We've kind of had a maybe 3 or 4 kickoff meetings so far. We've kind of established a working group. We're starting to discuss work streams we want to prioritize. We've been going through those very recently. Right now, we're kind of introducing this to the greater OCP team to see if anyone's interested and would like to hop on. Our next project call will be on the 4th, and that will be one where we'll kind of really try and hone in on what specific scope items we're going to establish as to work streams and how we're going to move forward. And that will really be our course through the end of the year. And if anyone's interested in joining, please reach out to Megan Diefenbach or myself. Our emails are up at the top. And so at that, I will hand it over to any questions.
Thanks, Joey. Appreciate it. Everyone, if you have any questions for Joey, feel free to paste them in the comments section to the right of the video player. Or if you'd like to speak using audio, you can click on the click to gain speaker access button at the bottom of the video player to join the Zoom. Looks like Anita has posted in the comments section as well with some information about how to get involved. So thank you, Anita. So Joey, while we wait for other questions to come in, can you say anything about where you see this particular work group headed in the next year?
So our early scope discussions have really kind of centered around 2 work streams. And one would be that log and monitoring piece we talked about earlier. And the other one would kind of be operational security of new construction and new builds. I think those are 2 work streams that we're trying to look and see if we can prioritize those. We have a gentleman named Marcelo who's kind of volunteered to run the construction operational security side of things, and we're really excited to see what they work out. On the log and monitoring side, I can speak a little bit more in depth on those. We're really looking at a couple of things there. And one, I want to start with log formats, right? Whenever we look at logging for ICS or BMS systems today, they're very operational logs. And so one of the things we want to establish is, can we set a series of tags or event IDs, for example, inside of event logs that we have in these devices that would identify those particular log items as a security event? And what that may look like is a form of standards to say, hey, we have X number of events. We have, each ID or ID type is tied to this type of event. So a login, for example, might be a security type of event, right? And so we would just kind of work to establish some of those things and build them into a set of standards that whenever people are building these devices and designing their log systems, they could say, hey, let's add this event ID or this tag onto a login event. And then we could be able to leverage that as a known security event. So that would kind of be one work stream. The follow on that would be maybe a monitoring framework to say, okay, we now have an established set of events that we know are security events in relation to these devices. If we were to look at common indicators of compromise in this space, how could we tie those indicators of compromise to these known event types and really establish a monitoring framework to say, if you have these combination of event types, that might tie back to these indicators of compromise, and you need to alarm and someone needs to action that. So that would kind of be that security monitoring framework. Again, we'll start with the security event types, and then hopefully after that, we'll follow up with monitoring frameworks.
Great, thank you, Joey. So Brevin is watching, and he's asked if you wouldn't mind bringing up your goals slide for these next few minutes.
So don't really have the goal slide, though we have the scope slide, and again, we're working to refine this as we speak. And so I should clarify that since we're still actively discussing with the current working group what our scope should be. So we have really tried not to settle on goals today. Our timeline kind of shows that as something for the end of December. What we really want to do is get everyone involved that we can, refine the scope. That will happen on the 12/4 call. And then on the 12/16 call, what we like to do is really take the settled upon scope and refine those into those work streams and those tangible goals moving forward. So a lot of this is still open. And so it's a perfect time to hop on the project if you're interested, because there's still room to really talk through things and add perspective.
Great, thank you so much, Joey. I really appreciate your willingness to chat here. Folks, if you are curious about Joey and what his work group is doing, please track him down. You can find him by searching in the main chat here in the FM Virtual platform. Reach out to him directly. His email is in the chat as well. Anita did want to add something in the comment section here. She said that there is a poll in the OCP forum to help us prioritize focus areas. Anita, which particular forum is that poll placed? You could just add on to your comment there for the folks watching. Well, great, Joey, thank you so much. With that, I think we can turn it over to our next talk. And